Hi, welcome to this month's webinar on Lewis Latimer. We'll get started by sharing the screen. This is one that I'm really excited to share with you. My name is Holly. I'm a program manager here at Edison Ford Winter Estates. And this is a PowerPoint about Lewis Latimer, Edison Pioneer. Oh, and where I am right now, what I'm in front of is the Lewis Latimer Home in Queens, New York, and I'll tell you a little more about that later. Lewis Howard Latimer was born in Chelsea, Massachusetts on September 4th, 1848. He was the youngest of four children belonging to George Latimer and Rebecca Smith Latimer, who had both escaped enslavement. Let me tell you a little bit about that. Apparently, they were on two different plantations. They were enslaved. They each had a different owner. They were granted permission to marry. And then they knew, I think, that once they were going to have their first child, that they needed to get away from there the best way they possibly could. And unfortunately, it involved, fortunate because they were able to escape, but George, who is much fairer skinned, had to pretend to be the slave master while Rebecca was pretended to be his enslaved person. And they did manage to escape, and they got to Boston. Captured in Boston, just after about I think it's 11 days, somebody recognized them that knew the enslaved master of George, and he was brought to trial as a fugitive. George Latimer was defended by abolitionists Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. This case generated a lot of publicity. He was eventually able to purchase his freedom with the help of a local minister and other abolitionists. Just pause and think about that one for a minute. Having to purchase your freedom, having to hide, having to pretend that you're white to go someplace to get your freedom. So they're going to have four children. But George disappeared shortly after the Dred Scott decision, which meant that it didn't matter where a slave was, even if they escaped to a place where there was not enslavement at that time, they were still considered enslaved and could be brought back to slavery at any time. We really don't know the reason why he disappeared, but that is the most likely guess. So it was a great hardship for the family. At the age of 13, Lewis, and by the way, Lewis is the youngest child, obtained a job as an office boy in a legal office. And there's one picture of George Latimer, his father. And so his mother is raising four children on her own, a Black woman in Massachusetts. There were not a lot of job opportunities, nor was there equal pay. Lewis got some jobs here and there, and then he was put into a farm school system. His two older brothers had been, and he ended up there because his mother just didn't have the income to continue to care for them at that time, though they certainly kept in touch with her. And I don't believe this was a very pleasant place. A good system actually involved working on a farm because Lewis, is going to end up running away, and he's going to lie about his age. He's ran from there, and he enlisted in the Union Navy in September of 1864 at the age of 16 to serve during the Civil War. He was assigned to the gunboat USS Massasoit, and he was honorably discharged in July of 1865. And apparently they did take place. They were in one battle in Virginia. So he was this is a stereo pair view, and the one on the left over here was the original, but that's how they used to make them. And the caption on this says, "Note small boat landing in the foreground." So right over here, with the guns trained out on the double-ender gunboat here the Massasoit. The original photograph is on the left side, it's stereograph pair. And this was on the James River in Virginia. So he hadn't even reached the age of 18 when he had that experience in the war. After the Civil War, Lewis came back and he worked with his mother doing some housekeeping work. And he later recalled that the legal firm of Crosby, Halstead and Gould, sometimes known as Crosby and Gould, solicitors of American and foreign patents, was looking for a colored boy with a taste for drawing. And that was a quote by him. While working as an office boy, and it would be kind of like being an assistant or an intern or something like that, he observed the draftsman, read books on the subject about drafting, bought secondhand drafting instruments, and learned drafting. He was skilled in using the tools of the trade, T-squares, triangles, compasses, rulers, and learned drawing to scale. Since all of the drawings were done by hand and in ink, it was very important that a draftsman not make a mistake. Eventually, the draftsman allowed Lewis to make some simple technical drawings. Due to his skill, the firm promoted him to a head draftsman. His pay increased from $3 a week to $20, but he was still paid less than the white draftsman. And I have read in one place that it was actually about $25 a week that white draftsmen would have received. So the prejudice was still there. And why is drafting so important? Because when people were submitting their patents, they needed a detailed drawing to show what it would look like and how it would work. So they were a very essential part of the patent process. And there's Lewis as a young man. And Lewis was not just a draftsman, a self-taught draftsman, but he also had some patents of his own. In 1874, and that's the patent over there, Lewis received his patent, co-patent with Charles M. Brown for the water closet for railway cars. That was an improved and safer toilet system for the railroad. The invention protected passengers from dust and debris coming up from the exposed tracks when using the water closet. So even though it might still be open, you didn't have the dust and dirt coming up, making it safer and more appealing to use. From what I could read, it was just basically like an open hole over the railroad tracks. I didn't know exactly where to insert this part, but as Lewis's life is going along here, in 1873, he married Mary Wilson Lewis. They had two daughters, eventually Emma Jeanette and Lewis Rebecca. Lewis's oldest daughter, Jeanette, married Gerald Norman, and Norman was the first Black person to be hired as a high school teacher in New York City public school system. The Latimers were involved in many things. They were active members of the Unitarian Church. In 1908, Lewis helped found what is the Unitarian Universalist Congregational Church in Queens, New York, and that's where his portrait hangs in the sanctuary. Lewis was an early and active member of the Grand Army of the Republic, and those are veterans, Union veterans of the Civil War, known as the GAR. He was very creative, and some of his interests included playing the flute and the violin. He wrote poetry, and I'll share some of this poetry later on. And he had a play that was produced. And additionally, he taught mechanical drawing and English to the new immigrants at the Henry Street settlement in New York. So over here, this is in later years. This is Lewis and his wife and some of their children and grandchildren and other close family members and friends. And Lewis Latimer had many accomplishments and did many things. And I didn't know where the best place to insert this, but I will tell you that one thing I read was of his love, his deep, deep love for his wife and of course his family. And here we are again in front of his house. It changed appearance over the years, by the way. During the time immediately following the Civil War, important scientific advances occurred in the United States. There was an explosion of inventions and new uses of technology, and inventors were securing thousands of patents in growing industries. While working at that Boston patent firm, Latimer met Alexander Graham Bell, and there's Bell right there to my left, who hired him to draw plans for an invention. I think you all know what that is, the telephone. And here's his patent right here. Bell was in a race to have his invention patented before anyone else registered a similar device. I remember I talked to you about the importance of a draftsman, their drawings. By working with him late at night, Latimer was able to provide Bell with blueprints and expertise in submitting applications that allowed him to file his patent on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 1876, just hours earlier than that of a rival inventor, Elijah Gray. And I bet you have some thoughts here. A couple of things. Yes, unfortunately, there was an Italian inventor who was working on the phone and never was able to get a patent for it. And so that is not credited there. It also says he filed earlier than Elijah Gray. I can't remember what they said. Bell is 5 and Gray was 35 maybe, or something like that. But that is not without controversy, because I read a recent biography of Bell, and some people think that there was something that went on there, and that Elijah Gray might have actually gotten his patent to the patent office first, and that Bell gets credit where perhaps he wasn't really the first person. I can't answer that, but I do know that there are suspicions raised. There's a really interesting biography of Bell if you want to follow up on that. But my focus here is what Lewis Latimer contributed to that patent. And you can see he did it in great detail here. Lewis leaves Boston in 1879. I believe that the company had changed hands and was under different management. And he goes to Bridgeport, Connecticut, where he gets a job at Follansbee's machine shop. But he has a skill far beyond the mechanical skill. And during his time there, this is a gentleman that was much better known during his lifetime than he is today. The inventor Hiram Maxim came through the shop and was surprised to see Latimer's skilled work. And I don't know why he was surprised, except maybe he didn't think he would find him at that place. But after finding out that he had been the head draftsman at Crosby and Gould, a place that Maxim had once worked, he hired him on the spot. And Maxim's company is known as the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, and he works there for 3 years. And this is a big rival of Thomas Edison. He works for Hiram Maxim, a very interesting man, the firm's chief engineer, and a man credited with inventing the first portable, fully automatic machine gun, as well as the mousetrap. So some very unique inventions and patents there. And remember, there's this rivalry between Edison and Maxim. And we'll find out a little more in the next slide what Lewis Latimer was doing working for him. Latimer is hired as an assistant manager and the draftsman for the United States, or the U.S. Electric Lighting Company, owned by Hiram Maxim. Maxim will be the chief rival to Thomas Edison, the man who invented the first practical electric light bulb, incandescent light bulb. The light was composed of a glass bulb surrounded by a carbon wire filament, usually made of bamboo, paper, thread, When the filament was burned inside of the bulb, which they have tried to extract, create a vacuum which contained almost no air, it became so hot that it actually glowed. By passing electricity into the bulb, Edison was able to cause the glowing bright light to emanate within a room. Before this time, most lighting was delivered through candles or gas lamps or kerosene lanterns or the arc lighting. The historian Phil, who was an engineer, definitely has a wonderful presentation when he talks about the Edison lighting system in detail. It's very interesting, simpler for a layperson like me to understand. And I urge you to come in someday to Edison Ford Winter Estates. He's usually here on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, and oftentimes he does a presentation on that. And Maxim hoped to improve on Edison's light bulb by focusing on his main weakness, its brief lifespan, typically only a few days. Latimer set out to make a longer lasting light bulb. He developed a way to encase the filament in a cardboard envelope that prevented carbon from breaking up. That gave light bulbs a much longer life while making them less expensive and more efficient. That required him to teach the workmen all of the processes for making Maxim lamps, including glass blowing. In just 9 months, Latimer had the factory in full production. And this is a patent by Lewis Latimer, not even his second one. It's in January of 17th of 1882. And there's the carbon. There's that M shape for the Maxim light bulb, rivals to Edison. And the inventor, do you see the name here, is Lewis Latimer. So I don't know if this is a Maxim shaped light bulb with that M filament for Maxim. Not well remembered today, but he was at the time. Latimer also assisted in installing Maxim lighting systems in New York City, Philadelphia, Montreal, and London. During the installation of lighting in Montreal, Latimer learned French in order to completely instruct the workers, as he was in the French area of Canada. In London, he set up the first factory for the Maxim Weston Electric Light Company. That required him to teach the workmen all the processes for making Maxim lamps, including glass blowing. In just 9 months, Latimer had the factory in full production. Unfortunately, it was in London that Latimer faces the greatest discrimination of his career. He faced a lot of prejudice. He got the job done, but it was a very unpleasant experience, and he was treated much differently than he had been when he had visited Canada and set things up, or even when he was in Bridgeport. He was treated with great prejudice from what I could gather, what I've read. Lewis left the U.S. Electric Lighting Company in 1882. So when he comes back from London, from what I can gather, not necessarily does he have a job waiting for him. And so he's going to leave Bridgeport, and he joins the Olmsted Electric Light and Power Company of New York. Latimer started working for Edison in 1884 and becomes involved in Edison's infringement lawsuits. He started in the engineering department and then transferred to the legal department of Edison Electric Light Company, and you will come to know that later as General Electric. And he stays on even when it has merged with Thomas Houston, and then when it becomes Edison Electric, and then General Electric. And when Edison leaves, Latimer is still there. He was the chief drafter and a patent specialist. He drafted sketches and documents related to Edison's patents. He looked over plans in search of patents infringements. He carried out patent searches, and he testified in court on Edison's behalf. So he was a patent expert, and not just, he was a patent legal expert. And he also has knowledge of inventions. He's done his own inventions. He's a draftsman. Often Latimer's expert testimony helped Edison win his legal patent court fights, as Latimer's testimony was held in high esteem. And back then there were numerous court fights. And I put this up here, just a little ad for the Edison incandescent electric light bulb, its superiority to all other illuminants. Lewis Latimer never worked in any of Edison's labs, but he was the only Black member of a group known as the Edison Pioneers, men who had worked closely with the inventor in his early years before 1885. And this has been cut, this has been edited to a smaller photo because there were more people in the original photo. He was one of 28 charter members who have been business or technical affiliates of Edison or his companies. And here's Lewis right over here. And here's Edison right here. Latimer also co-authored a book on electricity. Whoops, I forgot to turn my phone off, in 1890, called Incandescent Electric Lighting, a practical description of Edison's system. Let me say that again. He published a book in 1890 called Incandescent Electric Lighting, a practical description of the Edison system. And told by my coworker that's an engineer that this is a brilliant book, and obviously he is a brilliant man. In 1911, he became a patent consultant to law firms. So the two, it looks like Maxim, I think it was Maxim, and the GE decided to not compete against each other and kind of join forces. So he begins to work for multiple companies, eventually becomes a consultant to legal firms, and he works as a patent consultant. Some places I read till 1924 and other places till 1922, but he stops working for GE because they had made the decision to not compete and kind of join forces together with other lighting companies. Oh, in 1896, the Board of Patent Control of GE, and it was Westinghouse, excuse me, not Maxim, was formed, and Latimer became its chief draftsman and expert witness. He continued in that role until 1911, when he joined the consulting patent firm of Edwin W. Hammer, and poor health forced him to retire around 1922. As I told you, other places, it will say 1924. And this is Lewis in his later years here. Lewis died on December 11th, 1928 in Flushing, Queens, New York. His wife, Mary, predeceased him by 4 years, leaving him brokenhearted. His family published a book of his poetry during that time called Poems of Love and Life. And his daughters had this book published because they thought it would cheer him up. Lots of places where I read about Latimer, they call him the Renaissance man, an extremely talented and versatile artistic, musical, scientific, patent expert. I just listed a few of his patents here, and one of them here for the electric lamp with Joseph Nichols, that's what you're looking at. So his first patent, number 147363, was improvement in water closets for railroad cars. Then there's the one with Nicholas Joseph, for the electric lamp, September 13th, 1881. Then US Patent 252386, the process of manufacturing carbons. Remember, Edison's light bulbs didn't last long, but Latimer made that possible. The support, US Patent 255212, supporter for electric lamps with John Tregunning in March of 1882, and then US Patent 334078, apparatus for cooling and disinfecting. And January 12th, 1886. And that was similar. I've heard it described as like a predecessor similar to an air conditioning unit. A locking rack, US Patent 557076 for hats, coats, and umbrellas, March 24th, 1896. And then there was a lamp fixture, his last patent, 986787 with William Norton Shell, August 30th, 1910. So realize he invented, that wasn't his primary focus, but he made huge improvements to the filament light bulb. He's a draftsman. He becomes a legal expert on patents. And this is a drawing by Lewis Latimer. And it's from 1912. It was around the age of 65 that Lewis Latimer drew an illustration entitled My Situation. In the image, a man who looks like and is labeled as Latimer, and there he is right there, and this is drawn by him, is walking over a plank, and it's hard to see by this, but this is over the ocean. The plank is labeled Hammer Consulting Engineers. That's his new consulting firm. I think I told you that he's a part of it. That was the last one I believe he worked for. He's holding a giant drafting tool and using it as a balance. You've seen people walk across wires carrying a pole to balance himself. So that's kind of how he's using it. The tool is labeled 30 years of service, but there's a weight over here on the left side of his tool, and it's labeled 65 years old. I feel you, Lewis. The ocean on the left side of the plank says, wide, wide world, right over here. And he writes below, which way will he fall? There's General Electric there. So I'll leave that to you to analyze. But I think that Lewis is definitely speaking to us through this. Not a man given to complaining, but certainly through his talent shows us some of the dilemma and some of what he is going through. And this is another picture of the Latimer home. The Lewis Latimer home is a modest Queen Anne style wood frame suburban residence. Constructed in 1887 and 1889 by the Sexton family. Howard Latimer purchased the house, lived there from 1903 until his death in 1928. The house remained in the Latimer family until 1963. And I believe it was left to his daughters. Eventually, one of his granddaughters will inherit it. She will live in part of it and then rent out rooms. And over the years, the appearance changed, and it had like these shingles on it that I know not very modern looking, and something that you can may have seen in some older homes. So it needed lots of work. And this is the really sad part. It was threatened with demolition, and because a developer was going to use that area. And this commonly happens in New York, so that it wouldn't, people didn't want it to be demolished. I guess they couldn't prevent it from having that site used for something development. So it is moved. It's not in its original location on Holly Avenue. It's in another location And if you go to the Lewis Latimer Home site, it can tell you the exact address. And it was moved there in 1988. It is owned by the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. It's operated by the Lewis Latimer Fund Incorporated and is a member of the Historic House Trust. And from what I can gather, it used to be open 3 days a week. Right now, I believe it's open 2 days a week from 11 to 5 on Friday and Saturday. And it's not a really big house. It does have some exhibits inside relating to Latimer. There, some artifacts and some informational panels. And it was restored as much as they could to its appearance during the time that Latimer lived there. This I found on the website of the cemetery where he is buried. So that's the credit to the Lewis Latimer Friends of the Oak Grove Cemetery. And I talked about his poetry, and I found it to be very beautiful and very moving. And so I will read this one to you. I wish he were here to read it to you. Ebon Venus, let others boast of maidens fair, of eyes of blue and golden hair. My heart, like needles ever true, turns to the maiden of ebon hue. I love her form of matchless grace, the dark bound beauty of her face, her lips that speak of love's delight, her eyes that gleam as stars at night. O'er marble Venus let them rage, who sets the fashions of all of the age, each to his taste. But as for me, my Venus shall be ebony. And this one, friends of my childhood, of life's early days, when together we wandered through sunny ways, bright sunny ways, each true to the other, till full manhood came, and found the old friendship as ever the same. Came summer and winter, years waxed and waned, youth it had left us, but friendship remained. And now as with white locks I bend o'er life's page, the friendship of my childhood is the friend of my age. And I wish they had recordings of his musical ability, flute, violin. And I have not been here. He was from Massachusetts originally. That's where he's born. And this is his stone. That was from a picture someone else took. It is of Latimer's gravestone. I'm assuming that its appearance is still that way. That happens, unfortunately, in a lot of graves. It certainly needs to be professionally cleaned. But you can go to the Oak Grove Cemetery in Fall River, Massachusetts, and visit his grave there. This is not even his grave, actually. It is his wife's, but he is beside her. So if you get a chance and you're in that area and you are interested, visit there. I would urge you to visit his home. Apparently at one point, his granddaughter had co-authored a biography. It's no longer in print that I could find. What did I want to tell you? That there are some mentions of him, books about Black inventors. Maybe I just didn't run across it, but I couldn't find a full biography. But there's so much more that I want to know about him. This left me wanting more. This is a person I think we all would have benefited from meeting and knowing. In 2013, a bronze statue was commissioned depicting Lewis Latimer outside the Margaret Morton Government Center in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And if you go there today, you can visit it, and him holding a light bulb. That was not without controversy. Apparently, I don't know what happened. Some funding was used that the mayor used that other people didn't think was appropriate, and they were going to move it. And they had a couple of other sites, maybe to an area where he had lived, maybe to campus, the university campus there. But eventually, due to the protest, was left there. I remember is Bridgeport that he goes to work for Maxim, and he invents that carbon filament. He has that patent on that. So I'll just go over a few of my sources, and I hope I've left you wanting more. I want more. I won't forget about Lewis. I'll keep on reading about him. I would love to be able to visit his home. Here's some of the sources that I used on biography. The Bridgeport History Center, because he did live in Connecticut. Smithsonian Institution has a little page about him, a little more than that. The Latimer House, and they have a PDF that's quite informative. The Harvard Square Library has a page on him. There's a Vimeo little 6 or 7 minute video that was done that you can go to by going to his website. The MIT Press Reader, they have something named after Lewis Latimer, 300 Years of African-American Invention and Innovation. It's one of them. If you go to our Rutgers, you can see the patents of Lewis Latimer, a profile on him. The podcast episode, Someone Lived Here, that talks about him. Thought Company, picture from the Navy site, and Universalist Unitarian Magazine, the fall of 2006, because remember, he was very active there as well. I hope that next month you will come visit again on the same date and time, March 8th, 10:30. I'm going to have something about Edison Ford, one of my favorites. I've developed one of my new favorites in Lewis Latimer. But if you join me next month, and remember, these digital discussions, they are put on the Edison Ford YouTube digital discussion. If you type that in, you can bring up all the ones that Adam did and I did, and we hopefully will get that on later today. But I hope I've left you wanting to research more about Lewis Latimer. I hope you join me next month on Edison Ford, somebody that's a favorite of mine, and I've gotten some information from the Edison and Eleanor Home. They've been very gracious to help me. And if you have any suggestions for programs, it's Schaeffer, SHAFFER, at EdisonFord.org. And if you ever want to send a donation to Edison Ford Winter Estates, 2350 McGregor Boulevard, Fort Myers, Florida, 33901. That is pretty much it for this month. I think I might have a chat. Thank you. I appreciate the feedback on the research. I appreciate you all joining me. And next month, as I said, I'll be talking about Edison Ford and his legacy. And I hope you'll join me on that one. If I don't have any other comments, oh, so fascinating. Thank you for the info. Thank you. My goal is to have you have an interest in the topics that I present. I'm passionate about history. I wish I was a better scientist. So I always appreciate your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions. And I hope to see you all next month. Thank you. I'll see you then.